Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're going to try and connect some pretty disparate dots. We're looking at a very specific, very local legal crisis and linking it to a huge global theory about technology and control.
It's definitely an ambitious link to make.
And just to set the scene for you, it's November 27th, 2025, and we are recording this in Katy, Texas. And this is important. We're about 300 feet away from the home of the former FBI director, Robert S. Mueller III.
And that isn't just a fun fact. That physical proximity is actually a key data point in the entire investigation we're about to unpack. It grounds the whole thing in a very real, very tangible way.
Okay, so what's our mission here today?
Our mission is to take this pile of source material, which, it started as this internal look at procedural problems and alleged fraud inside the Texas court system.
Right.
And from that, we're going to try and pull out this massive overarching hypothesis.
A hypothesis about what exactly?
About how governments, and not just here, but worldwide, have systematically, and maybe without even realizing it, handed over control of critical state functions to private tech companies.
And this whole theory has a name, an internal label from the source. It's called Demo D 1998.
Yeah, the number itself is probably arbitrary. Maybe it's a throwback to an old project name or something. But the concept it represents it's really profound.
So at the very heart of this deep dive is one core idea.
Abdication.
Abdication.
That's the word. We're defining it here as the systematic global giving up of crucial government duties.
Okay, so what kind of duties are we talking about?
Well, think about the absolute fundamentals, things governments have always done, maintaining maps, geographic reality itself.
Sure.
Controlling transportation, regulating how money moves, even putting out public health information. The sources argue all these duties were basically sacrificed.
Sacrificed for what?
For shiny new technology, for these standardized, seemingly more efficient platforms that big private companies were offering.
So the goal today is to trace that path. How did the source, a former Google engineer, get from a local lawsuit in Texas to this huge global conclusion?
Exactly. It didn't start with mapping or currency. It started with a very personal legal battle with allegations of fraud and, being denied due process at multiple levels of the Texas judiciary. It all began with being stonewalled by the system.
Right, the system just grinding to a halt.
Or being actively stopped. The initial work was all about figuring out why. Why was fundamental due process just systematically disappearing?
And that question brings us right into part one of this, the legal gauntlet and what the source calls procedural signals.
The first big signal, the first major red flag in the source material, was the denial of the second petition for a writ of mandamus.
And this was directed at a specific judge.
Yes, Judge Brown, who was, it's worth noting, appointed by Governor Abbott.
Okay, so the petition is denied. What reason does the appellate court give?
The reason is very procedural, very bureaucratic. They just said want of jurisdiction over Judge Brown.
Which in plain English means?
It means we don't have the authority to order this judge to do anything. It's a way of washing their hands of it.
But the source material flags this immediately, doesn't it? It says that excuse just doesn't hold water.
Exactly. The counterargument is that, well, that's just factually not true. It's constitutionally shaky at best. The appellate court absolutely has supervisory power over the lower court, the 387th.
So by refusing to act against Judge Brown, who was supposed to be supervising that court,
they are effectively using a procedural excuse to shield the lower court's actions. It's a deflection.
And what's really interesting here is that the source apparently saw this coming.
That's a key point. The source predicted that lack of jurisdiction would be the exact reason they'd use to dismiss it.
And when you can predict a complex legal response like that, what does it suggest?
It suggests the decision wasn't based on some deep, impartial legal analysis. It suggests it was a pre-planned defensive move by the institution itself. They already knew the play they were going to run.
Okay, so this is where it gets really clever. The procedural detail itself becomes a clue. The source argues that this specific dismissal method, it actually proves something.
It proves they read it.
It proves they read the petition. How?
Well, think about it. If the justices had just looked at the cover page, the case caption, Judge Brown's name isn't there.
Oh, okay.
Her name, the specific challenge to her failure to act, all of that was detailed inside the body of the document.
So for them to say, we don't have jurisdiction over Judge Brown.
They had to have gone inside and identified her as the target of the mandamus. They're signaling that they processed the content. It's a subtle but really powerful sign that this wasn't just ignored. They engaged with it and made a conscious choice to kill it on a technicality.
And what they read inside that petition was so explosive that they had to kill it. This is what the source calls the kill shot allegation.
Yes, this is the fraud at the center of it all. The petition flat out alleged that certain individuals, Troy Pickett, Morgan Hibner, and ultimately a specific law firm, the Adams law firm, had committed fraud on that very court.
The Adams law firm? And the Chief Justice of that same appellate court
Is also named Adams.
Wow.
It creates this, unavoidable conflict of interest, or at least the appearance of one.
So let me get this straight. The court receives a petition, they read it. It alleges systemic fraud by a law firm that shares a name with their own Chief Justice, a Chief Justice appointed by the same governor who appointed the other judge in question.
That's the situation.
And instead of saying, whoa, we need to investigate this, they dismiss the whole thing on a very shaky procedural claim.
Precisely. The refusal to even touch the substance of the claim, especially a claim of fraud against the court itself, isn't seen as just, an oversight. It's seen as a deliberate, systematic refusal to create a public record. It's an act of burying the evidence to protect the network.
Which is a huge escalation.
A massive one.
So what's the next move? The appellate court shuts it down.
The response is immediate escalation. Straight to the Supreme Court of Texas, the COTX.
And the filing there is described in a very specific way. Simple, short, and a kill shot. Why?
Because it's designed to be impossible to ignore. It boils the entire conflict down to 3 fundamental questions that force the highest court in the state to confront its basic constitutional duties. It makes a procedural dodge much, much harder.
Okay, let's break those questions down. What was the first one?
The first question was about a clear technical violation. It asks, basically, did the trial court abuse its power by signing a major substantive order after its authority had been legally stripped away by a motion to recuse?
So once a recusal motion is filed, a judge is supposed to stop.
Right. They're supposed to stop. They can't make substantive rulings until the recusal issue is settled. Signing an order after that point is a textbook overreach. So the mandamus asked the Supreme Court to just vacate that order because the trial court had no legal power to issue it in the first place.
Simple and technical. What was question 2? This is the one about the immunity clause.
This one is constitutionally explosive. It's extraordinary, really.
What did it ask?
It asks if a single trial court judge has the power to unilaterally grant absolute immunity, both civil and criminal.
Absolute immunity.
Yes, to all Texas law enforcement, police, sheriffs, everyone, for any future actions they might take while enforcing a court order.
Wait, a judge can just say the police can do whatever they want to enforce this, and they can't be sued or prosecuted for it.
That's what the clause, allegedly inserted by the Adams law firm, appeared to do. And the petition asks the Supreme Court to strike it down as unconstitutional. No judge should be able to write a blank check like that for future unknown actions. It's a huge separation of powers issue.
And the third question seems to tie it all together.
It really does. Question 3 is the summary argument. It asks if a mandamus is necessary when the entire lower judiciary, and it names them. The 387th Court, Judge Brown, the Court of Appeals under Chief Justice Adams, has systematically refused to provide a hearing.
A hearing for what?
A hearing on an order that is allegedly void and that violates fundamental parental rights. It uses the lack of a hearing as proof that the whole system has malfunctioned, forcing the Supreme Court to step in and defend the basic concept of due process.
The denial of a hearing seems to be the central violation here. Why is the act of simply holding a public hearing so dangerous to this alleged network?
Because a public hearing changes the venue. It moves the battle from the shadows of backroom bureaucratic maneuvering into the public spotlight.
It creates a record.
It creates an official public record. The moment the petitioner gets to stand in front of a microphone and enter evidence of fraud and misconduct onto that record, possibly in front of witnesses or press who aren't part of the network,
The network loses control.
they lose 100% control over the narrative and the evidence. So the entire strategy of procedural dismissal is designed to avoid that one moment of public accountability at all costs.
This brings us to a really fascinating concept from the source material. It's a technical metric applied to a legal system. The unreasonable lead time, or ULT signal.
This is a brilliant conceptual leap. The ULT metric wasn't invented for law. It comes from the world of supply chain security.
Supply chain, like tracking packages.
Exactly. It was developed to detect if an item, say a piece of electronics, had been intercepted in transit to be tampered with or bugged.
How'd that work?
Simple. Let's say a standard part normally ships from the warehouse in 1 day, but suddenly one specific shipment takes 10 days to arrive. That huge, unreasonable delay, that's the signal. It suggests someone intercepted it, opened it, did something to it, and put it back in the system. The delay is the evidence of interference.
Okay, I get the analogy. So how did the source apply this to the court system? What was the weird lead time they observed?
It was a stark and completely counterintuitive contrast. When the petition was filed at the Supreme Court of Texas, the clerk accepted it and stamped it in under 20 minutes. It was almost immediate.
And the lower court?
The previous filings at the lower appellate court took hours, 4, sometimes 5 hours, and they often came back with clerical errors that needed to be fixed.
That seems backwards. You'd think the state's highest court would be the slowest, the most backed up.
You would, but the source's hypothesis flips that on its head. The idea is that response time is inversely proportional to the level of internal control and debate. Speed indicates a predetermined status.
So slowness means there's a problem.
Slowness means friction. The theory is, if a court is heavily controlled by this internal network, a clerk can't just accept a potentially explosive filing on their own authority. They have to stop. They have to take the document off the front desk and walk it back to someone in what the source calls the bizarro state.
The bizarro state. Can you explain that term? What's the analogy for the listener?
Think of the bizarro state as the shadow power structure.
What?
It operates in parallel to the official on-paper bureaucracy. The formal court structure is the play everyone sees on stage.
Right.
The bizarro state is the director, the producers, the people pulling the strings backstage. So if a filing comes in that threatens the producers, the front desk clerk has to take it backstage for instructions.
And that's what causes the delay, the backstage negotiation.
Exactly. That manager backstage might have to call their boss, and you get these layers of internal debate. How do we handle this? Can we kill it procedurally? Who are we trying to protect here? All of that negotiation takes time. That's your 4 to 5 hour unreasonable lead time.
So the fact that the Supreme Court accepted it in 20 minutes suggests what?
It suggests there was no internal debate. Either the filing was deemed so constitutionally critical that it bypassed the normal channels, or perhaps a decision had already been made at a higher level of the network before it even arrived. Its status was pre-approved.
It's an amazing application of a technical audit metric to decode hidden bureaucratic processes.
It really is. It infers the presence of a hidden network just by measuring operational friction.
Okay, so the fight escalates beyond the Texas courts. The source seems to view this as a federal issue now, and they take a big step.
Yes, as a direct result of what was perceived as escalating harassment, the source filed a formal Form 211 report with the commissioner of the IRS.
Moving it from the state judicial system to federal law enforcement.
And making it official. The filing wasn't just a letter. It included a formal disclosure book that contained all the court documents, the technical analysis, everything. It even cites its own ISBN and Library of Congress control number.
So it's creating a permanent, traceable, official record of the allegations at the federal level.
Exactly.
And who is the top target named in that IRS report? This is what gives it so much weight.
The list of reported individuals starts with Robert S. Mueller III.
The neighbor.
The neighbor, 300 feet away. And that physical proximity is everything. It's the key to the credibility of the claim.
How so?
Look, if you file a report from 5,000 miles away accusing the former director of the FBI of being involved in some vast conspiracy, it's easy to dismiss you as a crank.
Right, just another person on the internet.
But if you make that same claim while living 300 feet from his house, it provides this undeniable physical grounding. It implies a capacity for direct observation. It makes the claim much harder for an official body like the IRS to simply ignore without investigation. The source also notes that other names on that list have public records of bribery or corruption, which makes the whole package even harder to dismiss.
This whole legal battle, then, becomes the catalyst. It's what forced the source to start looking for the underlying technology that could enable this level of coordinated control.
Precisely. Which takes us to part 2, decoding the network. And this starts with something called the co-occurrence marker.
Okay, so once the legal side was understood, the focus shifted to finding the players in the network, the people operating outside the courts.
Right. And the technical hypothesis was that this network, which the source alleges is the PayPal Mafia network, had embedded a kind of signature, a hidden marker, into our everyday digital infrastructure.
Like Google Maps.
Starting with Google Maps, Bing Maps, these global GIS platforms, the marker is this co-occurrence signal.
It sounds like a secret handshake, but a digital one. How is it defined? How do you spot it?
It's a very specific kind of pattern recognition. You're looking for a textual overlap, a co-occurrence of the same distinctive word or phrase in two different places in the map's knowledge graph.
Okay, what two places?
First, in the entity name. So that could be the name of a person's company, or even a custom name given to their house in the Google Maps database.
And the second place?
The street name, where that company or house is located.
Hmm. Now, wait a second. My first thought is, couldn't that just be a coincidence? Or just how developers name things? You see Cypress Creek Estates on Cypress Creek Lane all the time.
That's the critical question, and the source has a rationale for why it's not a coincidence.
What's the argument?
It hinges on what a normal, say, upper-middle-class person would do. The argument is that you're highly unlikely to name your company after the street you currently live on, because where you live is temporary. What if you move in 2 years? Your company, Elm Street Ventures, is now located on Oak Avenue. The name becomes meaningless, unprofessional. For this marker to exist, the source argues, the person has to have enough power, either over the local development or over the mapping data itself, to force that match to happen.
So its presence isn't just random. It signals importance. It signals you're a key player inside this network, able to manipulate reality a little bit.
Key players in plain sight. That's the phrase used.
So we're looking for naming patterns that just don't feel normal. The source provides 3 specific examples to back this up, right?
Yes. The first is a man named Carlton Woods, who's described as a major player in real estate with a huge multi-million-dollar property.
And the marker.
It's crystal clear. His name is Carlton Woods. His company is called Carlton Woods Associates. And the address of that company is 1 Carlton Woods Drive.
Wow. Okay, so name, company, and street all have Carlton Woods in them. That's pretty specific.
It's presented as undeniable proof of a deliberate marker.
Okay, example number 2 is Michael Cohen. And this one introduces a new idea, a functional prominence marker.
Right. Cohen has 2 properties that are cited as evidence.
Okay.
The first one is pretty standard. He has a company called Toohey Capital, and it's located on a street named Toohey. That's the basic co-occurrence.
Okay.
But the second property is the really fascinating one. He has this huge 14,000 square foot mansion, and in Google Maps, it's located on a street called Two Gunway.
Two Gunway, where does that come?
That's his social media handle.
You're kidding?
The street name in the digital map is based on his personal online alias. This is seen as a much more powerful marker. It's functional. It suggests he's so important to the network that they will literally alter the digital reality of his address to match his network identity.
That's incredible. And the third example brings us right to the top of the tech world.
Yes, Travis Kalanick, the founder of Uber, his house in the Google Maps knowledge graph, the data specifically curated by their internal MapFacts team, has an entity name. It's called the Bellagio Estate.
And the street.
It's on Bellagio Road. So the pattern holds, whether it's a real estate mogul, a political operator, or a tech titan. If you're a key player, you get the marker.
This analysis then leads to what the source calls the smoking gun. This is the shift from a compelling hypothesis to what's presented as direct proof of data manipulation.
And this proof comes directly from digging deeper into Michael Cohen's properties on Google Maps.
What was the discovery?
The source notes that his new mansion shows up correctly on Two Gunway, but the source also knew that Cohen controls the property right next door.
Oh.
So if you click on the map entity for that adjacent house, the house right next door, the MapFacts database still shows the original street name.
Which was?
Debris Lane.
So on the exact same physical stretch of road, Google Maps will tell you the street has 2 different names depending on which house you click on.
Exactly that. This inconsistency is the smoking gun.
Because it proves what?
It proves the data was manipulated. It's relatively easy for someone with the right access to go into the MapFacts database and change a few bytes of text to rename a street Two Gunway. But they got sloppy. They forgot, or just didn't bother, to update the data entity for the house next door.
So they left behind the original unmanipulated data point.
They left Debris Lane visible for anyone who knew to look for that inconsistency. It proves the network chose to alter the digital map, which is easy, rather than go through the massive, real-world bureaucratic pain of getting a county to officially rename a street.
And that observation that private companies were just digitally rewriting reality is the huge pivot point in this entire investigation.
It is. It forced the source to zoom out and ask a much bigger question. When did we, as a society, decide to delegate the very definition of land reality to private companies?
Which throws us directly into part 3, the theory of abdication across key verticals.
The map data manipulation was the clue that the problem was much bigger than just Texas courts or a few marked houses. It suggested a global pattern of governments handing over the keys to the kingdom.
So let's start with the first and maybe most basic case study. This fundamental shift in geographic data, or GIS. What did that world look like before all this?
Well, you can look at a model from, say, Venezuela in 1985, but it was basically the same everywhere. The responsibility for maintaining geographic truth property lines, street names, house numbers, tax maps, that was a government job, period.
And it was fragmented, right?
Totally fragmented and local. It was handled by ministries of public infrastructure and departments of transportation, and at the very local level, county offices, sometimes called the catastro.
And what was the big weakness of that old government system?
It was a mess. It was slow. It was inconsistent from one county to the next. A lot of it was still on paper. It just didn't perform well on a global scale. Standardization was a nightmare. And that inefficiency was the vulnerability.
And into that vulnerability steps the shiny object.
Exactly. The PayPal Mafia network, or groups like them, show up with this incredible planet-scale technology, Google Maps. And it just works. It solves the fragmentation problem instantly.
And governments, what? They just embrace it?
They abdicated. They were thrilled. It was modern. It was efficient. Their citizens loved it. So they effectively stopped doing the hard work of maintaining their own GIS infrastructure and just started relying on Google's. They outsourced reality.
Then what's the giant flashing national security sign that comes with that decision?
It's the problem of monolithic control. If a single outside entity, the source suggests, for instance, the Communist Party of China, gains control over the commercial company running that global map,
They control the map for the entire planet.
they control the foundational data layer for the entire planet. It's not just about changing street names for your friends. It's about logistics, military planning, intelligence. If the very map of your country can be subtly altered by a foreign power, auditing your own physical reality becomes impossible.
Okay, let's move to the second case study. Transportation and taxes. This feels like an abdication of accountability in exchange for convenience.
The history here is so important. Before Uber, the taxi industry was one of the most heavily regulated sectors in the world, and for a good reason, public safety.
What did that regulation look like?
It meant mandatory exams for drivers, background checks, certifications. It meant buying expensive licenses or medallions. The cabs themselves had to be a certain standard with a number printed clearly on the side.
So you always knew who was driving you, and the car was inspected.
Accountability.
Total accountability. Then came the Uber model, the shiny object,
The convenient app.
which was brilliantly convenient. But its real genius was that it completely bypassed that entire regulatory system that was built for safety. And this is where we see that two-prong attack the source talks about.
Let's break that down. Prong one is what? Weakening the old system.
Yes, the network didn't just launch a better app. They funded these massive lobbying efforts and media campaigns that did nothing but attack the corruption of the old system. The $250,000 medallions in New York.
That was the poster child. They hammered that point home again and again. The narrative was simple and effective. Your government system is corrupt and broken, so we need to get rid of it. Once they successfully dismantled the regulations, the government's role in transportation safety was gone, clearing the way for their tech monopoly.
And what's the danger when you abdicate that control?
It's a massive security risk. When you get rid of standardized inspections and driver vetting, you create an opening for foreign actors. The source specifically raises the possibility of, say, CPC agents posing as Uber drivers.
And with no oversight.
With no regular third-party inspections of the vehicles, they could be used as mobile hubs for espionage, for installing listening devices on a scale that would be impossible to track. The convenience of the app was used to undermine public and national security.
Case study number 3, medical information. The example used is WebMD. This feels like an abdication of the duty to provide life-saving information.
It really is. For more than a century, one of the government's most important jobs was to give its citizens accurate, reliable public health and medical information. Think of the CDC, National Health Services. That was their purpose.
So where did the abdication happen?
It happened in our own homes. People stopped going to the slow, clunky government websites. If you have a weird symptom, what do? You don't call the Department of Health. You go to WebMD.
You diagnose yourself and figure out what to buy at the pharmacy?
which is a complete transfer of responsibility for critical health decisions from a public trust to a private for-profit platform.
And the risk there is about information integrity, I assume.
It's a huge risk. The source sees this as a profound abdication. If that private platform is ever compromised, if the information is subtly biased to sell certain drugs, or if data on a public health crisis is delayed or manipulated to fit a certain narrative, the government has completely outsourced its duty to protect its citizens. It enables total control over the public's understanding of health.
Which brings us to the fourth and final case study, currency and finance. The source calls this one the most shocking example of all.
Because it's an abdication of maybe the oldest and most fundamental power of a sovereign state.
The power to create and control money.
Exactly. For all of modern history, governments printed currency. They secured it. They could trace it through serial numbers. That power is, in many ways, what defines a nation.
But almost nobody uses cash anymore.
And that's the abdication. The tech solution was just too good. Super efficient online payment systems starting around the year 2000 just made physical cash obsolete for most people.
And private companies took over.
Private payment processors gained monolithic control over the entire global flow of currency. The system is digital, it's centralized, and it's privately owned. And the move into crypto is just the next logical step in that private financial control.
The source also talks about the cost of this control. That 3% fee the processors charge is a key signal, isn't it?
It's the literal price tag of the government's abdication. The source argues that the profits from that constant 3% fee are so unimaginably large that they don't just cover the operational costs of running these global systems.
There's a lot left over.
There's enough left over to fund the entire network's activities and, to quote the source, harass 98% of the planet. That profit margin is what maintains their technological monopoly and cements their control over the world's financial flow, a power that now dwarfs that of most governments.
So if we pull all four of these together, mapping, taxes, medicine, and currency, this pattern emerges, the common TTP, the two-prong attack.
It's a very clear, very strategic playbook. It's all designed to maximize the performance gap, the delta between the old government system and the new tech solution.
Let's just state it clearly again. Prong one is sabotage.
Prong one is to intentionally weaken the competition. You make sure the government systems, the Department of Transportation, the CDC, the County Land Records Office, are performing as poorly as possible. The source alleges this is done by inserting agents into government who ensure that processes stay slow, bureaucratic, outdated, and maybe even a little corrupt. You make the government fail on purpose.
And once it's failing badly enough, you roll out prong two.
Prong two is you introduce the shiny object, the amazing, convenient, globally scaled tech platform. And because the government alternative has been so intentionally degraded, the performance gap is huge. Adopting the private solution becomes a no-brainer for the public.
And the result of that is profound. It's not just about using a better app.
The result is that government dependency replaces governmental purpose. The government's role in that whole area of life just withers away, and total control is achieved through the tech monopoly that the private network now holds. And the final goal is always the abolition of regulation, because regulation is the only thing left that protects these sectors from complete capture.
It's an incredible chain of logic, starting from a 4-hour delay at a clerk's office and ending with a theory of global infrastructure control. Which brings us to our final section, reversing globalization and the power of fragmentation.
After laying out the problem, the source proposes a solution.
So what's the core architectural flaw that this two-prong attack exploits?
The flaw is always the aggregator. In every one of these strategic areas, technological globalization created a single monolithic aggregator, a single point of control. It's an undeclared monopoly run by one group or controlled by a foreign power through that group. Centralization is the attack vector.
So if centralization is the problem, the solution must be
Decentralization, fragmentation. The source argues that these strategic sectors, payment processing, GIS, transportation accountability, they have to be taken aback. They have to be reassigned as a government function.
Now, the immediate pushback to that, especially here in the U.S., would be that nationalizing these things would be incredibly inefficient and expensive. The government can't run anything right.
The source counters that with a simple cost analysis. The argument is that the actual operational cost of running a system like PayPal or a national mapping platform is negligible for a government.
How so?
Well, if a private company can run it, pay for all its global operations, and still make billions in profit off a 3% cut, Then a government could run the exact same system, get rid of the 3% cut entirely, and save its citizens a fortune. It's framed not as a new expense, but as a massive cost-saving measure for the public.
And this leads to the ultimate architectural vision: fragmentation as a desirable property.
Exactly. The goal isn't to create one big, clunky government system to replace the one big private system. It's to reverse technological globalization in these key areas and promote localized solutions that can still cooperate.
Fragmentation makes control harder.
It makes collusion and single point of failure attacks much, much harder to pull off.
So what would that look like in the real world? Let's use the currency example.
It would mean that the payment processing system for the United States would be its own separate government-owned utility operating under U.S. law. And the payment system for, say, Venezuela would be its own separate utility operating under Venezuelan law.
So collusion between the two becomes much more difficult.
Infinitely more difficult. But, and this is the key, the two systems still need to be able to talk to each other. If an American needs to send money to someone in Venezuela, the systems must be compatible through shared standards. But the underlying control, the infrastructure itself, remains fragmented and local. You want compatibility, but you want to avoid monopolistic globalization at all costs.
It's fascinating. We started this deep dive with an allegation of fraud in a Texas courtroom, literally a stone's throw from a very powerful neighbor.
And we ended with a global theory about how critical government functions have been captured through technology.
It really shows how a failure to get a simple hearing in a local court can be, in this worldview, connected to these massive vulnerabilities we've created by abdicating our core responsibilities for maps, transport, health, and money.
The common thread is always technological dependence, breeding governmental irrelevance.
So we've looked at 4 huge strategic areas that the source claims were captured by this two-prong attack: mapping, taxes, medicine, and currency. As we close out, here's the final provocative thought for you, the listener, to take away from all this.
If these 4 areas, which really touch every part of modern life, were captured so easily by this playbook, what other core government services are vulnerable right now? What might be in the middle of that prong 1 intentional weakening stage as we speak? Think about things like water infrastructure, our energy grids, food supply chain logistics, or even the new digital identity systems being rolled out. What areas are being intentionally degraded right now just to pave the way for the next shiny object that will be offered up by another private, centralized global aggregator? The question isn't whether the tech is coming. The question is whether we're consciously defending against the vulnerability that comes when we depend completely on it.